The assault on our Capitol on January 6th last year is a day that should live in infamy in the minds of every American. The insurrection was a direct assault on our democracy and an attempted coup. The global collapse of democracy has invaded America, and it's up to us to fight for democracy and the American way of life, lest we lose our freedoms and our right to vote. We must never let our country be overthrown and ruled by a dictator. Come to make sure it never happens again. Let's gather together to call for an end to the politics of division and to protect democracy and voting rights. I will be holding a candlelight vigil in Whittier, California at City Hall at 6 p.m. Our featured speaker is United States Representative Linda Sanchez. If you're in the East Los Angeles County area or nearby, come by on Thursday, January 6th at 6 to remember the insurrection and the officers who lost their lives and the damage that was done to our nation. We will meet in front of City Hall in Whittier, California, for a candlelight vigil and to remember those who died and were injured defending our Capitol and our nation. And if you're not in Whittier, go to jan6unityday.org to find an event near you or even to host one in your town or community. That's jan6unityday.org. It's so important that we defend our democracy and remember the insurrection for what it was, an attack on democracy, so that we can make sure that it never happens again.
Now, according to public reporting, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser first called Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy to ask for help at 1:34 p.m.
It looks now like the Capitol Police...
Yeah, Pete, let me break away from you a second because things are happening very quickly.
According to your written testimony, you were, quote, aware that demonstrators had breached the Capitol.
Let's talk now about propaganda to avoid when talking to conservatives. And there are many words that we should avoid when talking about politics. But democracy is not one of those words. If you want to talk, I mean, a lot of my motivation for doing this is that there's been a dissing of democracy and all the democratic propaganda. And now we're being told that we want to use the words voting rights and stay away from the word democracy because people don't believe in democracy. Young people don't believe in democracy. Now, this slide tells us that's true. Look at this. And look at for how long it's been going on. How long has the decline in belief in and support of democracy been going on? For a long time already. And it's taken a turn for the worse. And this slide only goes up to the 80s. So that's a problem. It's not, oh, people don't believe in democracy, so we're not going to talk about it. No, we need to, they've been misled. They're taught wrong. And so we're going to need to stand up for democracy. Yes, we can talk about, I think voting rights is a good idea. It's a good idea to have voting rights as a propaganda tool, as a messaging. But democracy is also important. Once we get them to realize that voting rights is important, we need to help people understand that democracy is important too. It's the only system capable of representing the will of the people. So some of the words that we should avoid. There are words we should avoid. Democracy is one of them. But we should avoid words like socialist, neoliberal, capitalism, capitalist. They're obviously unhelpful with conservatives and moderates, but we should never use these words actually in the context of a political campaign or as political labels. I mean, if you're in an academic context discussing political ideology, okay, but outside of the academic discussion, these words are most often used to attack our allies, to attack one another, and not against the right. And this is a problem that's been recent. We spend a lot of time on the left attacking one another. These words are used to attack one another. But let's start with socialism, though. The socialism is a highly charged word. It alienates millions of Americans. And we don't need the word. We don't really need the ideology either in our political discussions, but we certainly don't need the word. The only reason to use the word is to keep up the faith, the hope for an economic system that will bring salvation to all the world in the form of a socialist utopia. But what we really should do is ditch the word socialism. And the ideology is probably not that great anyway, but the truth is we're fighting for democracy, not socialism here. So never use the word neoliberal. It, particularly as a political label, it is an attack on liberalism and therefore by extension, liberal democracy. So why use the word liberal? First of all, it's an attack on fellow allies. It's an attack on liberalism. Liberalism is under attack from both the left and the right. We know how much the right hates liberals, but the left has been attacking liberals for a long time already. So people actually don't know what the word means, and we definitely use this against ourselves. So this is like anti-liberal propaganda. And this also makes me support that this word neoliberal as propaganda is probably coming from the same source. The propaganda against liberals on the right and the propaganda against neoliberalism on the left may, I suspect, be coming from the same source, because the only people who benefit, the primary people who benefit from the lack of belief or the denigration of democracy as a political system are authoritarians like Putin. Capitalism is an economic system. It's secondary to the political system, which determines the economic policies. Conservatives believe that free markets lead to human freedom. Socialists believe that economic equality leads to human freedom. Both are essentially wrong, but freedom and equality really only happen when the will of the people is truly represented in government policies. A truly representative democracy leads to freedom and equality. The only way through social democracy is through democracy. Now, here's some other things we should avoid. In my opinion, we should not call Christians Nazis. Don't use the label Christian nationalist. So when we're looking at this slide, what do you see here? What is it that you see in this slide? What are we looking at here? First of all, we're not engaged in the struggle against Christianity, and we should not be engaged in the struggle over Christianity. Such discussions quickly turn to a condemnation of large groups of people, of all of Christianity. It's not just a small sliver of Christian nationalism. The critique is of all of Christianity. And we don't want to get caught up in it. There's actually no one marching under the banner of Christian nationalism. So let's not create that banner for them. People have always justified their behavior using religion. That's no surprise. The white supremacists and Ku Klux Klan has always had a religious component to it. They've always used religion to justify all manner of atrocity. And ultimately, Christian nationalists do not represent the vast majority of the 73 million Trump voters or the rest of the electorate that have basically, they've effectively trounced Democratic hopes in the Senate by outperforming Trump in the election. So, and there's nothing wrong with being a Christian or believing in God. In fact, use scripture and resort to one's own faith for inspiration and guidance. And whenever you're talking about religion or your faith, you're reaching out to moderates and conservatives. So what I see here, and the first thing I see here is a book market. People are writing lots of books, selling lots of books on this topic. And the second thing I see, a target audience. Here's a target. Here's a group of people that we can target with this propaganda, this messaging that might come on our side. Yeah, so that's what I see here, that this is we need to look at both this and the democracy slide where we see the decline in democracy, not just as a measure of public opinion, but also a measure of the effectiveness of propaganda. How effective has the propaganda been in changing people's opinions over time or affecting people's opinions? So all the books on Christian nationalists have their effect. All the propaganda against anti-democratic propaganda has had an effect. And we need to address that if we're going to save democracy. So we want to avoid anti-American propaganda. And I want to advise you not to get involved in debates about what our school children are being taught. Conservatives have an inherent advantage when their children are involved. And it's important to remember that the people who attacked our nation's capital are not school children. The police officers who are beating and killing people in the streets are not school children. I cannot believe that anyone goes through our system of education and doesn't learn about the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement. Our schools are doing a fine job. Avoid this debate. We shouldn't be there. Mask mandates, okay, that's protecting people's lives. Telling teachers what to teach other people's kids, we're not winning any support that way. Don't call people racist. Okay, this probably should go without saying, but it's all too readily used as the first sign of disagreement. And this is more likely to be the end of the conversation, not the beginning. And yes, we used it against our own allies too. So try to avoid it. There's a new article out by, I don't know how new it is, but Protect Democracy put it out. And among some of the things it says is that when we appeal to talk about racism, we lose white voters. Now, I sort of see more when we are anti-American and are too negative about America and America's history, we're going to lose voters. When we claim to be socialist or promote socialism, we're going to lose voters. So that's the debate. How can we address these issues without losing voters? And that we have also in the article the tendency to attack one another. And Republicans don't do that, but we want to tell people, so that you're not a true Democrat or you're not a real progressive. So don't call people this, or even rhinos. Don't call people rhinos. I know most of you won't. Don't use litmus tests. These are purity codes that they exclude rather than include people. They tell us that, oh, we're pure, but and you're not, and therefore you are not true, not real. Tell them, when people tell me I'm not a real progressive, I just say, okay, I won't be a progressive then. Is that what you want? You want, that, don't do it. And I would advise against engaging, at least with your family and other moderates and conservatives, with these quasi-religious rituals like leftists like to engage in nowadays, such as reciting our native lands or identifying our pronouns. I mean, many people haven't even accepted gays and lesbians. They haven't accepted gays, and now we want them to accept theys. I mean, really, how far can we push these people? We can leave our hyper identity politics at home. Okay, so after all of this, one might ask, and there's a legitimate question to be asked here, and that question is this: have we lost our minds? What are we really thinking when, as my brother told me, we send paperwork to parents telling them about their child's choice of pronouns? My brother said that hit him, felt like it hit him in the gut. Do we think we're winning the minds and hearts of the American people by doing things like that? I don't think so. So I want to talk about one last thing here, a few extra slides. So many of you may know who this person is. Some of you may not. Her name's hard to pronounce. She goes by Jiggy, and she's the executive director of the Independent Strategic Research Collaborative. So she is a professional propagandist. Now, the fact that she's a professional propagandist, I don't have any problem with. We need professional propagandists. We have a big messaging problem. The fact that she's a professional propagandist, I don't have any problem with. I don't necessarily have to agree with her, but we do need professional messaging. So, but let's take a look at, this is from a job description. So let's take a look. Communications alignment. The Independent Strategic Research Collaborative facilitates research and communications alignment to help the progressive movement realize the promise of a truly equitable multiracial democracy. So, the most important point here is the point that we are being propagandized. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, we're not being propagandized. We only speak truth. Our guys are only speaking truth. It's not the case, okay? And thank God it's not the case. We need propagandists, but we also need to be aware of it. What does she mean by communications alignment? And what does she mean by multiracial democracy? So there's been this debate, should we use the word democracy or should we use the term voting rights? And I think this lady came up with a good idea to use the word voting right, especially for those deceived and misled young people who have been taught wrong. Yet at the same time, is that really the motivation behind it? Should we be just accepting, first of all, that people don't believe in democracy anymore? And then secondly, are we actually participating in that by framing the democracy debate into the racial narrative? And I've been opposed to that for a long time. I'm a strong advocate of building a pro-democracy movement. I've been resisting the attempt of the anti-racist movement to take over the democracy movement and subordinate it to their cause. And I've been fighting against that, but I could not hold them off forever. And so recently, it has come out that they have decided that vote democracy is out, voting rights are in. So here's a little more. Our research, large-scale briefings, messaging memos, and strategic intel tie together desperate voting and electoral issues under a single narrative umbrella. See that narrative that is able to both grow and inspire greater engagement from our base. It's a base strategy. This is not a strategy to reach out to the middle of the country. It's a strategy to organize and align the base. And so that I got one more slide here to show you. And then we are deliberately low profile in order to ensure collaboration and buy-in with partners. So what that means, they're on the DL, they're on the down low. So they don't want us to know what they're doing. Why voting rights beyond just subordinating democracy to the racial narrative, to the anti-racist movement, but also democracy and socialism? Are we being aligned ideologically as well? Because all this anti-democracy, neoliberalism stuff and attacks on fellow Democrats are coming from some of these same people. And it's harmful to the cause of democracy. So I think while she's got a good idea in promoting voting rights and using that as a rhetoric, it's not a good idea to not use democracy and not talk to democracy. That's the only way we're going to bring the country together. And that may rally the base, but it's not going to reach out to the center. So this brings us to the messaging problem on the left and the wokeness debate. And this part of the program is for you guys. I've pretty much had my say. How do we reach out to the middle? We will need the entire nation behind us to pass the Freedom to Vote Act and other legislation designed to shore up our flawed democracy. We will need the pillars of power and middle America engaged in the struggle if we are to resist the coming attack on voting rights, or God forbid, the imposition of a dictatorship. But if we come off as anti-American, anti-Christian socialists, we aren't winning anything.